Welcome, Samara Sterling, to the Me and My Health Up podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Anthony. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And where are you from in the States?
Well, I am based in Albany, Georgia. It's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit right now. So that's pretty hot, very hot here in Georgia, but we are an agricultural community. So you see a lot of greenery, you see a lot of peanuts, you see a lot of corn and cotton around here. So it's an awesome place to be.
Awesome, fantastic. And please share your backstory as to how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
So I'm a nutrition scientist, and I hear that from the time that I was a child, I was interested in food and nutrition. I would watch these cooking shows or health shows and then consider myself the host of the show when I was maybe 5 years old. So I was always really interested in it, even as I was growing older. And I think a turning point for me came when my father was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. And I remember sort of thinking about ways to help him and what can I do? And of course, as a young college student, I went to the only thing I knew how, which was Google. And, when I went to Google, that's where I sort of realized that there were so many articles I was finding about how foods affect human health. And that really piqued my interest. As I continued looking, though, I realized I hit a ceiling because there's so much information out there. Who do you trust? What do you listen to? And that's when I decided that I wanted to go back to school and actually study this for myself. So after doing that, I've spent the last 10 years focusing on plant-based nutrition and how that affects human health, chronic diseases, and overall health and wellness in general. And it's been a pleasure for me to do that. I currently serve as the research director for the Peanut Institute, and that is based in Albany, Georgia. And of course, peanuts are an awesome superfood, and we are looking at how that affects human health as well. So it's amazing.
Fantastic. And we'll certainly get into peanuts a bit later on in the show. But for now, I'm really keen to find out more about what was the most profound findings you found over the last 10 years when you've been studying plant-based diets for chronic diseases.
Well, I would say that one of the most profound things that I have seen from years and years and years of research. First, you see Dr. Dean Ornish, right, who did quite a bit of studies in the early 90s and 2000s. And he was able to look at how majority plant-based diets can reduce risk for cardiovascular disease, and other researchers being able to actually document that these dietary patterns can not only prevent someone from getting these diseases, but can even in some cases reverse arterial plaque that has built up in the blood vessels. And that to me was really amazing because it shows this concept of food as medicine, as food as what it was intended to be, as something that's a healing agent for our bodies. And if we are able to just eat the right things and eat more of the nutritious things on our plates, then that can really benefit our bodies in amazing ways. So I would say that's one of the most profound things that I have learned over the past 10 years. And this is years and years of research that spans maybe 30, 40 years or so. And we continue to see it being confirmed in even more of the science that's coming out now.
Wow. And what else have you seen other than, supporting cardiovascular disease? What other systems have you found the plant-based diet really supporting?
Well, we also see, like you said, not just cardiovascular disease, we also see brain health as one of the main areas as well, because the heart is connected to the brain. So, for example, researchers at Harvard University and Rush University, they have come up with this dietary pattern called the MIND diet, and they've shown that adhering to this dietary pattern can actually reduce your risk for Alzheimer's disease by about 53% as you're aging. And as we know, Alzheimer's disease is one of the top 10 killers, right? And so that's another one that is really critical to consider. Diabetes is another. Chronic kidney disease is another. So many different ailments that we found, but those are some of the major ones that we see affecting so many people across the world that are affected by what we eat.
Yeah, it's amazing. Food is medicine. It's fantastic to see that the research is now, I guess, supporting these ailments, and that people have, within their control, and on a regular basis, they can be doing things to support their health and well-being. So they can make better decisions at every meal to support their overall wellness. So it's fantastic to see this research coming out. Mm-hmm. And in terms of what you're specifically working on at the moment, what are you looking into? What are you researching?
Well, and I know that you're in Australia, so we actually had a study that's being released out of the University of South Australia, and what that study did was it took adults who were at risk for diabetes and gave them traditional weight loss diets for 6 months, right? And half the group, in addition to that traditional weight loss diet, ate 2.5 ounces of peanuts, about 75 grams of peanuts each day. And what they found remarkably is that after the end of 6 months, the group that included peanuts in their diets lost the same amount of weight as those who did not include peanuts in their diet. The reason that is significant is because folks tend to have a misconception about peanuts that this is a high-fat food and it's going to make me gain weight. But what the research shows is the exact opposite. Peanuts are actually good for weight management because it promotes satiety so that you don't eat as much as you would if you're not as satiated. So that's another thing. And then the other thing that they found in that study, interestingly, is that the group who consumed peanuts, they had lower systolic blood pressure by the end of the study than those who didn't. That part is significant because the study actually used lightly salted peanuts. And of course, the lightly salted peanuts was not high in sodium, maybe about 100 or so grams of sodium, less than that, maybe about 90 to 100 milligrams. And even just having the lightly salted peanuts, we saw that we got those benefits. And so I think that's really significant because a lot of people, of course, you're thinking about the salt. And of course, we should have lower sodium diets. We shouldn't eat too much salt. But at the same time, it shows that a superfood like peanuts, even in a lightly salted state, could also positively affect blood pressure as well as weight management.
Fantastic. It's really pleasing to see the effects it's having on blood pressure. What is the mechanism behind that? Do you know?
Yeah, so there are a few potential mechanisms. I won't say that we know for sure, but there are a few potential ones. So, for example, peanuts have one of the highest levels of arginine. And arginine is an amino acid that functions as a precursor to this compound called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is well known to be a vasodilator, which means it opens up your blood vessels. And what that does is it helps to decrease your blood pressure. So peanuts being one of the richest sources in arginine, it's possible that that's what's really causing the benefit that we're seeing with the blood pressure. And then the other thing to say there too is not that we're telling people, oh, eat a bunch of salt in your diet. Not at all. We want to make that very clear. At the same time, though, palatability and enjoying your food is also important. And we find that just having maybe a little bit of salt, which again, very lightly salted, helps folks to eat the good foods that they should be eating more and more. And that's what we saw in this study.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of what's your favorite peanut recipe?
What's my favorite peanut recipe? Well, I work at the Peanut Institute, so we have a lot of those. We have so many of those on our website, and I have been privileged to try quite a bit. And we work with some amazing dietitians and influencers who have recipes that they share with us that they create. I personally love power bowls. Power bowls are becoming all the rage right now. And we have one on our website, which is chickpeas, quinoa, you have your veggies like spinach, Brussels sprouts, sweet potatoes, and then you have a peanut sauce, a Thai peanut sauce that goes on top of it. Oh, it's just amazing. I really love that recipe. It's quick, really easy to prepare, and then it's also super healthy. And I love the fact that you can get all of these antioxidants and all these nutrients in just this one bowl, topped off with a powerful plant-based protein source like that peanut sauce there. And to me, it's just delicious as well as nutritious, as well as very tasty. So I love power bowls.
Well, I'll have to get that recipe from you and share it in the show notes for the listeners, because when you were explaining it, I was getting that watery mouth and thinking, oh, that sounds delicious. So I'd love to share it with the listeners.
Yes, it's really good. I'm sure your listeners would very much enjoy it.
And in terms of superfoods, how is a superfood defined? Like, what categorizes a particular food as a superfood? Is there a strict definition, or is it more a marketing term?
Yeah, there's no strict definition. And I think the term is one that sort of just helps consumers to identify a nutrient-rich food. Right. And because, again, there's so much information out there and folks are asking questions like, what is healthy? And so the term helps people to identify that when they go to the supermarket. So it's loosely defined as a food that is considered nutrient dense and especially beneficial for human health. And mostly what you're going to find that in is plant foods. So blueberries are one of my favorite superfoods, especially when we talk about the brain. You hear about kale a lot, like your dark green leafy vegetables. And the great thing about superfoods is that when you combine them, the antioxidants in them actually have sort of this exponential effect. So it's not like when you combine, you get 1 + 1 = 2 and you have that additive effect. Some research shows that when you combine them, you have this exponential effect, or you even have more of an effect. So 1 + 1 might equal 4 or so in terms of the effect that you get from the antioxidants. We see this, for example, with broccoli and tomatoes as it relates to prostate cancer. Those antioxidants, when you combine them, they're even more powerful at preventing prostate cancer than either of those foods by themselves. And we also see the same thing with peanuts. If you combine peanut butter with sweet potatoes, it helps to enhance the vitamin A that you would get from sweet potatoes, or even another food that contains vitamin A like kale or something. So it's really amazing to be able to see these superfoods, put them together in the diet, and see just the amazing effect that they can all have on your body and your health.
That's a really interesting concept, that food combinations that, synergizes the outcome, as you're saying, 1 + 1 = 4, or it really, what other combinations out there? Because I'm just thinking the listeners are probably fascinated in terms of what you just mentioned around the combinations of, broccoli and tomato for prostate, and what other combinations have you got out there?
There are others such as ginger, so like the curcumins in ginger. I think when you combine that also with tomatoes, the lycopene in tomatoes, that's another one. And then even if we think about just the proteins, combining proteins in general, for example, if you have a whole grain like oats, and you combine that with peanuts, those complement each other in terms of the protein profile, or something like whole wheat with peanut butter. That also complements each other in terms of the protein profile. So again, I think it's an amazing concept, that food synergy that we see from that protein perspective, but also from the micronutrient perspective as well.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned earlier this MIND diet that's really beneficial for Alzheimer's, incredible in terms of what the research is finding. Is the MIND diet primarily consistent of plant-based foods, or is it superfoods, or what is the main constituents of the MIND diet?
So the main constituents of the MIND diet, yes, it is mostly plant-based, but it's not exclusively plant-based. And the key thing to note about the MIND diet is that it's not really a prescriptive diet. So it's not something that is that restricts participants or folks who adherents to the diet to, okay, so you can't have this food or you can't have that food. Instead, what it does is it says, eat more of these foods each week and eat less of these other foods. So the foods that you want to eat more of, you want to eat more berries and especially blueberries. Of course, your strawberries, your raspberries, your blackberries are in there. And then you also want to make sure that you're having your dark green leafy vegetables 5 times a week or so. Nuts are also in there. Fish is a part of that diet, which is why it's not exclusively plant-based, but the fish is added for the omega-3 for the brain. And then the less of certain foods like your sweets or your fats, like your butter and your hard fats at room temperature. These are the ones that you want to sort of cut down on each week. And that's why I think the Mind Diet is such a really good one, because a lot of folks are able to follow it quite well, right? You can, for example, give yourself a treat day. We don't like to say cheat days, right? We like to say treat days. If you want to give yourself a treat day and you have a dessert, let's say on a Sunday or so, you don't have to feel guilty about that, because as long as you are including more and more of your green leafies and your blueberries, the truth is that you have less space to eat dessert all day when you're eating the good foods each and every day. So I think that's the concept there, a positive one and one that's attainable for everyone.
And what do you follow in terms of your regular diet? Have you got a specific diet you follow or adhere to?
Well, I've been plant-based for the last 13 years or so. And for me, I'm mostly plant-based when I do travel. So, and my reasoning for that is for health reasons. And so when I do travel, I may bend just a little bit based on what's available. But again, for me, it's not about what I'm taking off my plate. It's about what I'm adding onto my plate. And so I don't do as much of the processed foods if I don't have to. If I have access to more whole, unprocessed foods, that's kind of what I tend to steer towards.
Awesome. And in terms of what I see a lot in clinic, I see that people are realizing that plant-based foods are way better for them, and so they'll go onto these vegetarian, vegan diets and avoid animal products. But when I go through those diets, I see there's generally there's not much protein. So I'm really keen to explore plant-based proteins with you, what types there are and how much someone that's on a plant-based diet needs to consume of these proteins in order to get their daily intake.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're on a plant-based dietary pattern, you'll find, so protein is found widely in a variety of plant foods, obviously, but you will find larger quantities of protein in your foods like nuts and peanuts, beans and lentils, and soybeans. So sort of 3 classes of foods there. You'll also find a larger quantity of protein in many grain products like wheat and oats. So some products may have like the gluten from the wheat. So if you don't have a gluten allergy or gluten sensitivity, you may be able to do that. And the protein can take a variety of forms. So it can be whole, unprocessed, like you and I talked about, maybe minimally processed or ultra processed. So let's take soybeans, for example. Soybeans can be eaten in its basic form, and that can be used to make tofu or soy milk. And those are also nutritious. Can also be used to make meat alternatives that mimic the texture and taste of animal meat. And these you can find more and more now in the supermarkets. So that's sort of where you'll find your protein sources, depending on what your preferences are and what your dietary goals are. In terms of how much each person needs, there are a few ways, and Australia may be a little bit different here from the US, so I'll just preface that. But the recommended daily allowance for protein usually works out to be 50 grams for adults each day. And if you take that into perspective, you want to try to have good sources of protein or high sources of high protein, typically those are the ones that provide 10% or more of what you need each day. It is why we say foods like peanuts are a good source, a great source of protein, because they provide more than that 10% there. So you're getting that in your snacking or in your meals. So I would say in order to get your protein, and I'm not sure that it's as difficult as we may think that it is. However, we do want to be mindful of it. Definitely want to be mindful, because you don't want to go under what you need each day. So just making sure that you're having your nuts, your peanuts each day, making sure that you're having your beans, your lentils. I always give that tip. Make sure you have at least a bowl of beans each day. That's chickpeas, black beans, any kind of beans that you like. Lentils are one of my favorites. I have those each and every day. I actually had lentils this morning for breakfast. I think there are some trends that are happening right now that are a bit more concerning as far as protein. So while, for example, a watermelon steak might sound intriguing, if you eat a watermelon as a steak, you may not be getting the protein that you need in that meal. So you just want to be mindful that if you want to try something like that, then just make sure you're also having your soybeans or your beans, your nuts, your lentils on the side with that meal, so that you can get the amount that you need each day.
And do other nuts, other than peanuts, in terms of almonds, macadamias, walnuts, do they also contain greater than that 10% of protein within them?
Yeah, so it depends. In general, nuts contain protein, yes. Peanuts do contain more protein than any other nuts, which is why I've been sort of saying peanuts and nuts. But yes, almonds are also a great source of protein, so they do contain quite a bit of protein. Walnuts do have some protein as well. Pistachios do have some protein as well. But again, peanuts do have slightly more protein than other nuts. But yes, nuts in general are good for human health.
Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier the combination of oats and peanuts. And I was thinking of that smoothie in the morning, that combination of adding oats and peanuts and a bit of, it could be water and berries. You mentioned berries in the Mind diet. So I was starting to think of how powerful that combination would be in terms of that is, I guess, combination of superfoods and good combinations of superfoods. Yeah. In terms of peanuts, what other, like you mentioned that they're high in arginine, which was great. It's a precursor to nitrous oxide, which, helps, is a vasodilator and is helping lower the systolic blood pressure. What other constituents within peanuts that are really high, and what are the benefits?
Well, there's quite a lot of them, I'll be honest, Anthony. So peanuts contain at least 19 vitamins and minerals. And I say at least because there are over 2,000 minerals in the world. So it's likely that they have way more than we see. But just according to the federal database that we use to measure that, 19 vitamins and minerals. Also, peanuts contain a host of antioxidants. I talked about, so things like vitamin E, which is also a vitamin contained in peanuts. We have resveratrol, which folks usually think of this antioxidant when they think of red wine. It's the reason people drink red wine, maybe one of the reasons. But that one is also pretty good for the heart and the brain. Peanuts are also a pretty good source of resveratrol. And then there's another one called p-coumaric acid, which we are finding is able to target. So research has found that this particular antioxidant is able to target a specific neurotransmitter in the brain. This neurotransmitter is called GABA, and GABA is responsible for regulating mood and anxiety. And in a study in 2014, they actually found that p-coumaric acid is able to target that, and the result was a reduction in stress and anxiety. Now, a caveat to that was an animal study, so it wasn't necessarily done in humans, but it was one of the first that we saw with that p-coumaric acid there. And a follow-up to that, just a couple years ago, there was a study that we did in Spain that was able to highlight that picoumaric acid and its effect in young college students to actually decrease anxiety and stress as well. So powerful compounds in peanuts, again, 19 vitamins and minerals, great source of protein, great source of fiber, healthy fats, as well as the antioxidants.
Wow. And how much do you recommend someone should have on a regular basis, whether it be a daily basis or weekly basis? Is there a certain amount of not protein, but peanuts that someone should be consuming?
Yeah, so what is recommended is a handful a day. So an ounce a day, or about 30 grams, 28 to 30 grams per day, an ounce. That's what is recommended. And typically, if you just pull out that handful there, you should be okay.
And that's roughly that 32 grams is around 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. If you were to, be putting it in your smoothie, is that about right?
Yes, it's about 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. That's right.
Fantastic. Awesome. And throughout your, studies in nutrition and plant-based research, what are the most profound things that that came out to you in terms of what you learnt were misconceptions when you first started, like things that you went into and you thought, okay, I've heard of this, and then through the studies, no, that's not necessarily true. What are the things over your years that have really been, myth busted through your research?
I think that, with research, you end up with more questions than answers, right? So we are able to see these powerful correlations, and we see these powerful associations, but then we also come back with more and more questions. I think that questioning our own assumptions is really good too. But one of those assumptions, or one of those thoughts that I've sort of seen through the years, as you've mentioned, is just this idea that there is this diet that works for everyone. And if everyone does it this way, then everyone will be great this way. Well, the truth is that we all have varied circumstances, right? And so the idea is finding what fits for you and for your circumstance. A classic example of this is type 2 diabetes, right? So when someone has type 2 diabetes, they may have to watch their intake of certain foods than others as compared to someone who may not have type 2 diabetes. So we just have to be mindful of those differences between us and not be narrow-minded in the recommendations that we are giving or the recommendations that we're taking for ourselves. So just being sort of open-minded. Of course, we can all eat more plants in our diet, but as far as just what we eat in our diets in general, it can be variable from person to person.
Yeah, I love that. There's no one size fits all. It's everyone's completely unique and different, and needs to find a way of eating that really suits their needs and that ultimately their goals in terms of health. I mean, not everyone has the same health goal or outcome they want to achieve as either. So there's no point of imitating a influencer or a celebrity's diet because you got completely unique makeup and you might not want what they've got or where they're heading with their diet.
Yeah, that's right. And again, we just have to find what works for us. If you are, for example, somebody who's trying to build muscle, then okay, you may need a little bit more protein in your diet than someone who's not trying to build muscle, right? So things like that, just being mindful that, like you said, Anthony, each of our bodies is different, and think about your own goals, your unique goals, and then craft your dietary plan around that.
Fantastic advice, Dr. Samara. Now, just in terms of where you see nutritional research going in the future, I'm excited about your foresight as to where you see it heading.
It's actually connected to what we just talked about. This is actually an area called personalized nutrition. And in fact, the National Institutes for Health here in the United States has highlighted that as a 10-year goal, because we're starting to realize the effects that things like environment, social upbringing, genetic makeup, the microbiome, all these variables we are recognizing have such a profound effect on everyone's health individually, right? And so personalized nutrition says, let's look at those unique areas for individuals and not look at a one size fits all. I really think that is the future. I also think sustainability is going to play a key role into that. So not just what we eat, but how it's affecting the systems around us, the world around us, and how that is interconnected. I think these are buzzwords that are going to continue in the future.
Fantastic. That's really exciting to hear that it's going, in that direction of personalized nutrition. So, and taking into consideration all those factors that you mentioned. In terms of the peanut research, where's that headed? What are you working on next?
Yeah, so in terms of peanut research, we're really excited because we're seeing the signs point towards just this brain health area. And we're really excited to see what other areas of the brain peanut consumption can affect. So we've seen in the past, for example, 30 years of research has shown that peanuts and peanut butter consumption are good for cardiovascular health. Well, there's an intricate connection between the heart and the brain. And so it makes sense that what affects the brain quite well may also affect the heart quite well, and vice versa. That's what we're seeing with peanuts. And so we're curious about maybe other centers in the brain that we haven't explored before, that in general, nutrition science research hasn't explored before. And we want to look and see what that can do, what peanut butter consumption can do for brain health and overall mental wellness in general.
Fantastic. That's very exciting to hear, because as we're seeing in society, mental health is becoming more of a concern, particularly here in Australia. And no doubt that's probably a similar trend in the States, and particularly after the trauma that people suffered through the pandemic and things like that. So mental health is certainly an area that we need to address, and it's great that we can do something on a daily basis to address it. And good to see that the research is coming out that's, supporting food as medicine to support people's mental health, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, especially through the pandemic, what we saw from the data was that folks were more alert to the role that food plays on brain health. In other words, we weren't thinking as much about it before, but mental health has become top of mind, and we're asking questions like, what can we do to support better mental health? And of course, it's not just one thing to do. So it's not just eating peanuts that's going to do that, right? It's the entire lifestyle. So getting enough rest, getting enough exercise, getting enough water, getting enough sunlight, all of those things together. But all of these components additively, positively affect our brain health. And of course, the foods that we eat can also add to that. So we want to be mindful of that area as well.
And Dr. Samara, I'd love to know your top 5 health hacks. What do you do on a regular basis to look after yourself?
Oh my goodness. So my top, I would say like my top health hacks is, I travel quite a bit just for work. So I tend to think of hacks for just especially busy professionals. So I think of things like forward planning. So I'll say forward planning, intentionality, and accessibility. With forward planning, I think, when I go to the grocery store, when I buy my produce, immediately I wash my produce right away. The reason is that I don't want it to become a barrier when I'm trying to get out the house to work. Because, if you have to wash your produce, then that might slow you down. And then you may think, oh man, I'll just eat it when I get home. And then by the time you get home, you forget to eat it. In addition to that, I also make sure that throughout the day, For breakfast, every time with breakfast, I'm having fruit. And before lunch every day, I have a salad. And that makes me make sure that I get my fresh fruits and vegetables in there every day. So that's the forward planning part. The intentionality part was just making sure that I don't allow myself to get full on other things before eating my fruits and vegetables. So being intentional about that. And then the accessibility, I make sure that I keep healthy snacks on hand at my desk at work and also when I'm traveling. Some of those healthy snacks would include things like a banana. That's really good because it's easy to kind of just stick in your backpack, or like an orange. I really like to do that. And of course, I'm going to say nuts. That's another one that I always bring with me because you never know what you're going to meet when you're traveling. And unfortunately, sometimes the options that are around may not be the most nutritious. So having those things with you, having accessible, healthy snacks with you, for me, is just a must every time I travel. So those would be my tips.
Thanks for sharing them, Dr. Samara. And when you were sharing them, the word that was coming to my mind the most was preparation. You obviously prepare and you think ahead, and you're well armed in terms of any situation that arises. And you've got that great, I guess, healthy eating principles that you live by in terms of having that fruit before breakfast, the salad before lunch. I love it. It's there's such great health hacks that you don't really see that are shared all that often on social media, or I think you should put a patent on them.
Maybe, and it seems so simple, right? But it's such a good thing to just think, like you said, planning. Of course, there's that saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So just those two simple things can make a world of a difference, in terms of your health. And you actually feel good about yourself when you do it too, at least for myself. I feel like I've accomplished something already early in the morning because I've had my bowl of fruit for the morning, so it's really helpful both from a physiological perspective as well as a mental health perspective.
I love it, Dr. Samara Sterling. It's been such a delight to have you on the show, and I'm sure the listeners want to follow you more and connect with you. So how can they best connect with you?
You can connect with me, of course, through the Peanut Institute. So our website at the Peanut Institute is peanutinstitute.com. So feel free to check us out there. I'll also give you my email. My email is ssterling@peanut-institute.com. We are also on all the major social channels, so LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can find us there, and you can follow us through all of those channels, and that's how you can stay in touch.
Fantastic. And to the listeners, I'll include all those links, including Samara's email address, in the show notes. So you just have to go directly to the show notes and you'll have a link that you're looking for there. And just before we head off, Dr. Samara Sterling, I'd love you to share any concluding thoughts that you'd like to part with the listeners on nutrition.
I would say that my concluding thought would be that it's all about mindset, and it's important to remember that small changes really do make a big difference. It's what we've been talking about throughout this entire podcast, just in different ways, right? But just remember that small changes make a big difference. A lot of times we like to think about the grand things that we can do in life, especially if you're someone like me, right, where you are very ambitious about what can you do next. We like to think about big things, but sometimes it's the small things that really do have the impact that we want them to have. And when it comes on to our health, this is even more important because they have an additive effect. So don't underestimate, again, just making those goals for yourself. What are your health goals? What would you like to do? So if you're not accustomed to eating any fruit at all each day, if you're eating zero fruit at all each day, then just say, okay, I'm going to have one piece of fruit each day. and that's your small step towards your major goal. And you'll see over time that it'll have that additive effect, and you'll be surprised at the progress that you make. So I'll say, just remember that, and don't be hard on yourself, encourage yourself, and you'll get to the goals that you have for yourself.
I love those concluding words that you shared with us, Dr. Samara Sterling. They're so wise. And the whole episode has been really insightful, even for me as a clinical nutritionist. So I've learnt a lot, and there's no doubt the listeners have been armed with lots of great knowledge around nutrition. And I just love those simple ways of in terms of how you support people, in terms of those words around, for planning, setting the intention, and then, having the accessibility, making sure you got the foods on you, and then just taking the small steps. Too often we think about just wanting some quick wins or some immediate gains, and we try to do too much, and it becomes overwhelming, and so we do nothing. And I love that advice that you just shared around just looking at small tweaks that you can add into your diet. And it could just be 2 tablespoons of peanut butter every day. That could be it. It could be you put that in your smoothie in the morning with some oats, which is that perfect synergistic combination, oats and peanuts. So really appreciate these top tips that you've really shared on nutrition, Dr. Samara. It's been really insightful. Thank you.
Yes. No, and thank you for sharing this time with me and allowing me to meet your listeners too. So it's been great chatting about nutrition. We're both passionate about it. And I think that we are able to, more and more, we're learning about how foods can affect our health. And the more we learn, the more exciting it is to talk about it. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. And I'll definitely have you back on the show, Dr. Samara Sterling, because you'll come across more questions that you answer through your research. I'm sure you got some more profound insight to share with the listeners down the track. So would love to have you back on the show.
Yes, anytime.
And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. I really appreciate you listening and supporting the show. And if you found this insightful, please share it with others that could also benefit. So anyone you know that's got any chronic disease issues, they could really benefit about hearing Samantha's wise words of wisdom around plant-based nutrition for those chronic diseases, how they can be supporting themselves on a daily basis in addition to what they're doing medically. So please share this episode. We'd love it to get out to more people so that we can help more people, which is ultimately the goal of this podcast. So thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. Samara Sterling.